My husband said he was leaving home to take care of his ex-wife, claiming she was battling a serious illness with no one by her side. But when I discovered a nearly $1 million life insurance policy listing him as the sole beneficiary, I knew it was all a setup. And his scheme didn't end there. So I began making moves of my own. Before I tell you the full story, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. My name is Grace Whitmore, 33 years old, a nurse, 8 months pregnant. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, just as I finished folding the thin blanket over my belly, my husband, Stephen Caldwell, walked into the room with an expression of feigned gentleness and a voice so soft it made me hold my breath. He said he needed to leave home for a few weeks to take care of his ex-wife, Elaine Prescott, who was in the final stages of cancer and living alone in her suburban house. I looked at Stephen, the man I once believed would welcome our first son with me, and asked again, "How long will you be there?" He replied with eyes cast down, "Maybe a few weeks. Maybe until Elaine passes." I nodded, trying to remain composed, though my heart sank like it had been crushed. Stephen thought I would cry, that I'd lash out. But I didn't. I simply smiled gently and asked a few more questions about Elaine's condition, as any understanding wife might. Stephen looked at me as if he had escaped a trap. But I had already sensed the unease. He kept stroking his new Rolex watch, a piece he had never owned or bought while living with me. He also stressed that Elaine had no close relatives, that her parents had passed, and she only has me, the man who had divorced her nearly 6 years ago. His words were wrapped in a layer of sanctimonious lies, reminding me of the early days when we painted the backyard fence together, fixed the kitchen with our bare hands, and laughed when the toast burned. And now, he was leaving me in the most vulnerable stage of a woman's life, on the brink of motherhood, to return to his ex-wife. I asked just one question. "Do you think I'll be okay?" Stephen exhaled and said, "You're the woman with God's own heart." When he turned to pack in the bedroom, I quietly took his notebook and the spare phone he often left on the bookshelf. The phone had no password, and inside were countless emails between him, a lawyer named Daniel Rourke, Elaine's legal representative, and a man named Raymond Cole, a private investigator. The first email stunned me. Stephen had hired Raymond to investigate Elaine, confirming she lived alone, had no relatives, and was in the terminal stage of cancer. The next email was a scanned copy of a life insurance policy worth $800,000, with the beneficiary being none other than Stephen Caldwell. Another document stated, Elaine was being advised to transfer her estate from a charity to a trustworthy individual, which was also Stephen. Everything seemed premeditated. I closed the phone, put it back exactly where it was, and went on to prepare lunch as usual. I sliced apples, boiled water, smiled. While Stephen ate, my phone rang. It was Emily, my cousin, a physician. She called to check on the pregnancy, and I casually asked about Elaine. Emily sounded surprised. "Elaine Prescott? She doesn't need at-home care. Her terminal condition is being monitored at the Valley Creek Hospice. They've got full-time nurses and staff." My heart skipped a beat. I thanked Emily and hung up, one thought echoing in my mind. He's about to leave to take a woman's life and her money, and thinks I'll stay here, silent like a shadow. No, I wouldn't stop him. I would open the door, send him off to the car, and let the truth take care of the rest. That night, after lunch and the soup I had made, Stephen stepped out to the backyard to make a phone call. I didn't need to press my ear to the wall. His voice floated effortlessly, the kind reserved only for someone he was trying to charm. "I brought herbal tea." "The kind you like?" "Yes, the one with chamomile and orange peel." Grace prepared everything. I stood in the kitchen, hands still washing dishes, hearing each word fall into my heart like cracking glass. He was using me as proof to Elaine that he was a thoughtful, ethical man. But right then, I knew. I would play that role so well, He would never suspect a thing. The next morning, as soft sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, I folded every one of his favorite shirts, ironed each hand towel, packed jars of herbal tea I had steeped myself into little glass bottles. I labeled each one in neat handwriting: calm mind, relief, sleep well. I even added a small jar of honey, a gift from a work trip to Vermont, nestled gently beside the rest. Every item I packed in Stephen's suitcase radiated care, gentleness, precision. But it wasn't love anymore. It was the way a smart woman prepares the final stage for a con man. When I entered the living room, Stephen was at the mirror, adjusting his collar and shaving. He turned, slightly surprised I was still smiling. "You're so thoughtful, Grace. You're really not mad at me?" I looked at him in the mirror and shook my head lightly, my hand holding a soft earth-toned scarf, the one given to me by an old lady during a trip to northern Vietnam 2 years ago, in the biting 7 degrees Celsius cold. I folded the scarf and placed it neatly in the corner of his suitcase. "This scarf is warm. She'll probably need it." Stephen looked at me, hesitated for a moment, but said nothing more. As he wheeled his suitcase to the door, I followed, opening the front door slowly, as if seeing off a beloved. But in truth, I was ushering out a rotting part of my past from my doorstep. He paused, pointing to our old sedan. "Ah, I'm not taking that car. I rented a Mercedes yesterday. Wanted to make a good impression on her, so she sees I'm doing well." I nodded. No questions asked. I helped him transfer the luggage to the rented car parked by the curb. Shiny, luxurious, nothing like a vehicle meant for caregiving. Before he got in, Stephen turned and hugged me. His hand barely rested on my shoulder, out of obligation. "I know you're a good person, Grace." Truly, a woman of God, I didn't answer. I only looked into his eyes. And in that moment, I no longer saw a husband. I saw a man walking into flames, with a can of gasoline in his hand, not knowing I had placed a fire extinguisher behind the stage. As the Mercedes pulled away, I stood at the door, morning wind blowing strands of hair across my forehead. I didn't cry. I didn't call him back. I walked into the house, closed the door softly, and then I went straight to his office, the room with the safe. This afternoon, I'd open it, but first, I'd brew myself a cup of calm mind tea, the one I made for him, but never used for myself. Now it was my turn to need it. I placed the teacup on the small wooden table next to the armchair, listening to the ticking of the living room clock. In this house, now just me and the unborn child, everything was so silent I could hear the tea wrapper crinkle as I opened the box. But inside me was a storm, silent, discreet, yet constantly churning. I stood up, took the keyring Stephen often left on the porcelain tray by the bookshelf, and stepped into his office, a room he always locked when away, always claiming, "There are private documents from the old company." I had never asked more, because I trusted him. But now I know. Every woman should know how to open the doors they were once told to stay out of. The safe was in the corner of the room. A wall-mounted Honeywell, standard model Stephen installed last year. The code? So predictable it made me want to laugh. His birthday, 0729. A soft click, and the cold steel door swung open, as if it too was tired of hiding the contents inside. I didn't touch anything yet. I slipped on a pair of thin rubber gloves, the kind I used when caring for infectious patients, and began organizing the files. Right on top was the original copy of Elaine Prescott's life insurance policy, valued exactly as I'd seen in the email, $800,000. The documents clearly named Stephen as the primary beneficiary, signed by attorney Daniel Rourke, notarized in Denton County less than 3 weeks ago. I flipped through the pages, my heartbeat slow and measured, like counting the breaths of a critical patient. The final page was a claims instruction guide, highlighted in yellow, underlined, with 2 photocopies already made. No one prepares this thoroughly unless they're not just caring for an old friend. Beneath that was a stack of printed emails between lawyer Rourke and investigator Raymond Cole, with one passage that chilled my spine. Cole wrote, "Subject is isolated, no immediate family within 100 miles. Medical records indicate prognosis under 3 months. Recommend early asset transfer. Optimal timing within 2 weeks." I didn't need to be a lawyer to understand. This wasn't caregiving. This was predation. At the bottom, I found a loose set of pages titled Draft Heir Modification, Elaine Prescott Foundation. The original beneficiary was a charity supporting abused women in Texas. But in this draft, the name Stephen Caldwell was clearly typed, replacing the scratched out line. Target completion date, this Friday. Today was Tuesday. I didn't gasp. I didn't panic. I simply placed all the documents on the desk, took out a camera, not my personal phone, but an old Canon digital camera Stephen once bought to take photos of our future baby, now sitting unused in the drawer. I photographed each page, checking every image to ensure the text and numbers were perfectly legible. Evidence doesn't need noise, only precision. Once everything was documented, I put it all back in place, locked the safe, and left the room. Outside, the midday sun streamed across the polished wooden floor. I suddenly remembered the day Stephen proposed to me, also at noon, with sunlight slanting across my hand, where the wedding ring now sat a bit looser, as my body had changed. But the one who truly changed wasn't me. I returned to the living room, grabbed my laptop, opened the encrypted email app, and began composing the first part of my plan. An anonymous message, sent to just the right person. But not today. I needed the perfect moment. A time when any woman, even Elaine, would look up from her cup of herbal tea and see the truth sitting in her inbox. That afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight swept across the kitchen windowsill, I called the only person in my family I still kept in regular contact with, Aunt Margaret, my mother's younger sister. She used to be an elementary school teacher, widowed early, now living alone in a small house on the outskirts of Portland. We had a habit of calling each other every Sunday, but today was Tuesday, and I knew she would sense something was wrong from the very first. "Hi, Auntie." Her voice, familiar and steady, came through the line. "Grace, are you okay?" "You're breathing." "It's not even." I sat down on the edge of the bed, gently stroking my belly, my baby boy kicking faintly, as if he knew I was trying to stay calm. "Stephen." "He's gone, Auntie. He's moved in with Elaine. Said it's to take care of her in her final stage silence." A silence so long I could hear the ticking of her living room clock through the phone. Then she asked, slowly, each word slipping across old wooden floors. "You agreed to this?" I smiled softly, not because I was happy, but because I had waited for that question. I agreed. But I'm not blind. I told her what I had discovered. Just enough for her to understand, but not too much. I knew, even at 70, she was still sharp enough to recognize a scheme when it was laid out too perfectly. She sighed, then shared a story I had only vaguely heard before, never in full. "Years ago, your mother, my sister, was betrayed too, while she was pregnant with you. Back then, she had no proof, no lawyer, no one by her side. All she had was a handful of fallen hair and a maternity dress she couldn't button up. She chose silence, and that silence ate away at her bit by bit for years. I don't want you to be like her. You have a mind, a heart, a profession in medicine. But more than that, you have the truth. Don't let it get buried like your mother once did." I sat quietly in the bedroom, the sunlight now completely gone, just the dim yellow lamp casting my shadow on the floor. Aunt Margaret wasn't one for hugs or long reassurances, but that voice, recounting my mother's story, the woman I once thought of as fragile, made me realize I was rewriting the history of my own bloodline. That night, I prepared a new packet of herbal tea, set aside for Elaine. Not for care, but as a reminder that women, too, can observe, gather, deduce, and act, without having to raise their voices. I wrapped the tea in soft tissue, along with a plain white card. "May you always feel warm, even on the coldest days. No signature, not needed. Finally, I sat down at the dining table, opened a new notebook, and began to write the things I would one day tell my son. Not a story of betrayal, but a story of how his mother kept faith with herself, even when she couldn't trust anyone else. Later that afternoon, as I sat in the study organizing photo scans of documents onto a small silver USB drive, my phone rang. It wasn't a regular call. It was a video call from Stephen. His name appeared alongside an old profile photo, a snapshot of the two of us on our trip to Big Sur last year. His arm around my shoulder, my hand resting on my belly, now unmistakably the shape of life. I took a deep breath and hit answer. The screen lit up with a kitchen, too clean. The soft yellow glow of round pendant lights bathed the room like stage lighting. A vase of white chrysanthemums was slightly off-center, next to a box of neatly stacked medications that looked suspiciously like set decor. Stephen appeared in the frame, wearing a navy sweater, his hair still damp as if freshly showered, holding a Whole Foods paper bag. Behind him, Elaine emerged, pale-faced, hair in a loose topknot, wearing a cream velvet robe. She walked slowly, seemingly weak, but her eyes were sharply alert. For a second, I almost believed the fatigue. But then I saw her glance at the camera and adjust her collar with a gesture all too familiar, the kind a woman makes before stepping out from behind a stage curtain. I used to work in medicine. I know true frailty doesn't need such refined choreography. Stephen spoke, voice slightly raised as if trying to impress. I just got here. She's a bit tired, but still wanted to say hi. Elaine smiled faintly, waving to me through the screen. I responded with a gentle nod. Not cold, but not warm either. Hope you'll be helpful, I said plainly, then pretended to check the time. I need to check my blood sugar. Let's talk later. I ended the call without waiting for goodbyes. The office window was still cracked open, and I stood there, watching the dusk crawl across the porch like an old cat, slow and weary. Inside me, there were no more questions. Everything was clear. That house didn't have a dying woman. It had a pair of actors reconstructing an old romance to legitimize a new scheme. And this time, I would not remain in the audience. I opened my laptop, pulled up the encrypted email service. The documents were ready. I created a new sending address. No name, no familiar IP. I didn't send it yet, but I had already written the subject line. For you, from a woman who no longer believes in coincidence. I sat before the computer screen for a long time. The blinking cursor beneath the subject line was like my own heartbeat. Steady, deliberate, unhurried. There was nothing more to revise. I had reread everything I intended to send to Elaine. The photos of the life insurance contract with her signature, and Stephen listed as the sole beneficiary, the inheritance document redirecting her foundation to Stephen's name, and the exchanges between attorney Daniel Rourke and Detective Raymond Cole. I included a brief message. I don't need to know who you trust, but I think you deserve to know who's truly beside you, and why. If you feel cold, open the tea pouch. I only hope it brings real warmth, not like your kitchen today. I hit send. The email vanished from my inbox, like a stone dropped into a windless lake. I didn't hope for a reply. I didn't need confirmation. I just wanted Elaine to know someone was watching, and this time, that someone wasn't silent. I stood from the desk and walked into the kitchen. There were still a few gala apples I'd bought days ago. I took one out, peeled it slowly, each coil of skin curling like a ribbon. I'd never liked baking, but today something compelled me to return this kitchen to a state of normal, the normal Stephen thought I could never reclaim without him. As the pie baked, the scent of cinnamon and butter filled the house. I opened the window, letting the fragrance drift out to the front porch, where Stephen used to stand waxing the car, humming some old tune. I tidied the living room, put away the picture frames with his face, tucked them neatly into the coffee table drawer. I changed the pillow covers, placed a rocking chair by the window, where I planned to lull my child to sleep in the early months. To the right of the fireplace, I left a space clear. That's where the crib I ordered last week would go. I hadn't had the chance to show Stephen, and now I no longer needed to. I looked around the house. No more men's coats hanging behind the door. No more peppermint shaving cream. No more footsteps of two. Only mine, and the rising sound of an apple pie baking, as if reminding me that something new was forming. I hadn't called anyone. I hadn't told Emily I had sent the email. I just wanted to savor the stillness, like someone who has steered a boat through a violent rapid and is now moored in the shade. That night, lying on the sofa with my hand on my belly, my baby gently kicked. I placed my hand there and whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." Then I closed my eyes and, for the first time, slept without Stephen's steady breath beside me. Strangely, the sleep was weightless, dreamless. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The kitchen still carried the scent of last night's apple pie, but there was no sweetness left in me. I brewed a cup of decaf coffee, opened my laptop, and logged into the hospital's system, where I'd been working remotely during the final stage of my pregnancy. Blood test reports, messages from patients, prescription reminders, all familiar, grounding me against the chaos of my personal life. I typed notes carefully, feeling that my hands still had authority, still held control over something amid the storm. In the middle of work, my phone buzzed. A group message from some old friends, with a screenshot from Facebook. Elaine Prescott had just updated her status. She wrote that she felt immensely lucky to have Stephen by her side, caring for her through every meal, every cup of tea. Beneath the post, her friends commented, sent hearts, offered blessings, as if this was a beautiful, late-blooming love story. I looked at the screen in silence. They didn't know. No one knew, except me. One friend messaged me privately. "Grace, are you okay? Did you see this? I thought Stephen was with you, especially since you're so close to giving birth." I didn't reply. I let the typing dots appear, then erased them. I didn't need their pity. I needed their silence. In that moment, a thought flashed through me. It was time to have an ally outside the family circle. I picked up the phone and called attorney Linda McKinley, a middle-aged woman who had helped me resolve a small dispute at the hospital 3 years ago. Her voice was deep, clear, and direct. I gave her a brief account of what I'd uncovered: the insurance policy, the joint account withdrawals to pay for a private investigator, the inheritance documents. Linda wasn't surprised. She only asked, "Do you have the evidence?" I answered, "Every page, every word. I've documented it all." She paused for a few seconds, then said, "Good. It's time we draft divorce papers, and a civil suit, if needed. Would you like to start this week?" I looked down at my belly, where the baby shifted gently, reminding me that time was short. I whispered, "Yes, I would." In that moment, I felt a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of acceptance, but the quiet of someone preparing to walk into court, with evidence in hand and truth on her side. I sat back at the desk, opened my notebook. On the blank page, I wrote the first line of my new plan. No longer a wife, just a witness. And justice. That afternoon, I met with attorney Linda McKinley at her office in downtown Denton. The office was small and cozy, with dark wooden bookshelves packed tightly with case files and diplomas neatly framed on the walls. Linda, wearing black-rimmed glasses, sat behind her desk, flipping through the stack of papers I handed her with the meticulous care of someone used to reading lies dressed in legal language. She nodded continuously, her eyes brightening with each piece of evidence: the $800,000 life insurance policy, the documents transferring Elaine's foundation inheritance, and the spending reports from our joint account, where Stephen had withdrawn funds to hire a private investigator and pay insurance fees. "Grace," she said, her voice firm and low, "you're holding not just evidence for divorce, but grounds for a civil suit over financial fraud. We can use this to prove he misused marital assets for personal gain. I nodded, but said nothing right away. Inside me was a strange mix of cold resolve and deep sorrow. Cold, because I was ready to expose him. Sorrow, because the man I once trusted had turned everything we shared into tools for a scheme. I took a deep breath, placed my hand on my belly, and felt the baby shift gently, as if to whisper, "Don't back down." Just then, my phone vibrated strongly in my pocket. Stephen Caldwell's name appeared on the screen. I looked at Linda, who gave a small nod. "Answer it." On speaker, I pressed the button, and Stephen's voice burst out, frantic and panicked. "Grace, where are you?" "You have to help me. Elaine, she's crazy. She read some email, says I'm trying to steal from her, and kicked me out of the house. She locked the door, called her lawyer. I swear, I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to help her. Grace, please, believe me." I stayed silent, letting his ragged breaths fill the quiet office. Linda's face remained still, like a doctor listening to a failing heartbeat. I finally spoke calmly, my words like a scalpel slicing through the script. "Stephen, are you sure I'll believe you? After everything I've seen?" On the other end, he hesitated, then pleaded, "I don't know what you mean. But please, come get me." "I don't have a car. They took the Mercedes back." I closed my eyes, swallowing the chill in my throat. In that moment, I realized the balance had shifted. No longer was I the one waiting for explanations. He was the one begging for a lifeline. I replied slowly, each word deliberate. "Stephen, did you forget? I'm a nurse. I know what real illness looks like. And I know what real lies look like, too. Some things can't be healed." I hung up. The dial tone echoed in the stillness of the law office. Linda nodded slightly, pen already jotting notes. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the abandoned wife. I felt like the witness holding the keys to justice. From that moment on, I knew. Stephen's downfall had only just begun. It was already dark when I returned home, stomach churning from a day split between remote work and the lawyer's office. I had just set my keys on the table when the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Stephen. It was Emily, my cousin. Her voice was hurried. "Grace, I just drove past the Willow Creek suburb. You won't believe this. Stephen's sitting on the sidewalk outside Elaine's house, next to a pile of luggage. He looks like he's been thrown out onto the street." I closed my eyes, unsurprised. I asked quietly, "Is anyone with him?" Emily sighed. "Some neighbors are watching from a distance." And Elaine is standing at the door, talking to someone on the phone. I overheard her mention the police. In my mind, I pictured a man who once entered a home in a polished Mercedes and crisp white shirt, now curled up on a curb under the streetlight, his shadow stretched and distorted. A perfect reversal, like the curtain falling without applause. I didn't plan to drive there. I knew I had to preserve my strength, not risk a contraction so late in the pregnancy. "Emily," I said calmly, "do me one favor. Bring him back. But don't say anything to him, just silence." An hour later, the familiar sound of an engine hummed outside. I opened the door to see Emily step out, her face tight with irritation. The back door opened, and Stephen emerged, head bowed, shirt wrinkled, suitcase scuffed. He was no longer the confident, polished man. He was a man ejected from his own performance. Emily said only one thing before leaving. "Take care of yourself. Don't let anyone wear you down again." I nodded my thanks, watched her drive away, then turned back inside. Stephen stood still at the threshold, hand still gripping his suitcase handle. I opened the door wider, my voice unnervingly calm, even to myself. "Come in. Tonight, you sleep in the storage room. There's no space for you in the living room anymore." He looked up, eyes red, wanting to speak. But I raised my hand to stop him, gently closing the living room door behind me. In the quiet, only the ceiling fan hummed, and my tired breath filled the space. And I knew, without a doubt, the neighbors in our community chat would be talking soon about what happened tonight. But for the first time, I wasn't ashamed. I felt peaceful. The next morning, when I pulled open the curtains, I saw a flurry of messages in the neighborhood group chat. Someone had posted a blurry photo from afar. Stephen sitting on the curb outside Elaine's house with a suitcase. Another person added the caption, "What a drama! Thought he was Mr. Perfect, turns out he's just another fraud kicked to the street." I scrolled through without replying. I didn't need to add anything. The truth was spreading on its own, faster than any words I could speak. That afternoon, while watering the lavender pots on the porch, Mr. Henry Simmons, the notoriously chatty older neighbor, passed by with his cane. He paused, leaned in, and lowered his voice. "Grace, I heard Elaine threw Stephen out and threatened to call the police over some insurance scheme. This whole block is buzzing. Are you all right?" I looked at him and offered a gentle smile, neither confirming nor denying. "Mr. Henry, I'm all right." "And thank you for checking in." He nodded, his eyes a mixture of sympathy and quiet admiration. I knew, for people his age, my silent smile said more than any explanation. That evening, I called Stephen into the living room. He entered, shoulders slumped like a man who had lost all footing. On the wooden table, I had already laid out a folder: divorce papers, financial report copies, photos of the insurance contract, and the emails between him, attorney Daniel Rourke, and Detective Raymond Cole. I didn't say much, just pointed at the stack. "Stephen, sign here. These are the divorce papers. I've prepared everything. This house was bought with my personal savings before we married. You have no claim to it. I'm giving you 1 week to leave." He froze, eyes red, stammering. "Grace, you're the one who sent that email to Elaine?" I looked him straight in the eye, colder than any ER shift I'd ever worked. "Yes, I did, because I chose the truth over lies." He collapsed into a chair, trembling hands gripping the edge of the table, then looked up at me, his bloodshot eyes desperate like a drowning man grasping for a final branch. "Grace, please, let me stay until the baby is born. I swear I won't cause trouble. I want to hold your hand in the delivery room, to see my son born." His voice broke, shoulders shaking, as if this was his last plea after losing everything. I watched him for a long time, my hand unconsciously resting on the belly where our child shifted softly. For a moment, I imagined him at my bedside, holding my hand, pretending to be moved. But that image quickly dissolved, replaced by a cold truth. If I allowed him to stay until the birth, he would later use "for the baby" as an excuse to remain. And by then, I might weaken, might forget what he had done. I took a deep breath, then shook my head. "Stephen, you no longer have that right. I will give birth alone. I will teach my child to know the difference between love and deceit. And the first lesson will be this: not everyone deserves to be present when a new life begins." He stayed silent, his face collapsing completely. And in that silence, for the first time, I felt like I truly owned this room and this life. 2 days later, I received word from an old friend in the medical field. Elaine had contacted a local news reporter. She didn't want to endure this quietly anymore, and for the first time, decided to make everything public. That evening, while I was soothing my unborn child with a soft classical melody in the living room, the television suddenly lit up with the anchor's voice. "In tonight's special report, we investigate a life insurance scandal involving Stephen Caldwell." I sat still, hands cradling my belly, the screen's light casting shadows on the wall. The footage showed Stephen, worn down, caught on camera arguing outside Elaine's house, his suitcase slumped at his feet. Elaine's voice followed, shaky but clear, as she recounted how he and attorney Daniel Rourke prepared inheritance paperwork and tried to turn her illness into financial opportunity. The segment lasted only 7 minutes, but it was enough to set social media ablaze. The neighborhood group chat exploded. "What a con man! Poor Grace, pregnant and dealing with this. Police better be on this." I didn't need to say a word. I just sat, feeling the truth spread faster than any storm. That night, Stephen banged on the living room door, face pale as chalk. Grace, you saw it, didn't you? They're destroying me. I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, even my friends. You, you have to help me. We still have a child. I looked straight at him, my expression void of emotion. No, Stephen. We have nothing left but a single truth. You chose deception, and now you're living its price. He collapsed to the floor, hands clawing at the carpet as if searching for an anchor. But I didn't kneel beside him. I turned, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door behind me. And in the sound of that door closing, I knew I had placed the final period on the last act of the play he orchestrated. And for the first time, I was no longer a supporting character, but the one rewriting the ending. On Monday morning, a notification from Attorney Linda appeared in my inbox. The police and the Denton County District Attorney had officially opened an investigation into Stephen Caldwell, following the televised exposé and Elaine Prescott's formal complaint. I read each line with my hand resting on my belly, feeling my son kick gently, as if he too were listening. The notice stated clearly, Stephen was suspected of misappropriating marital assets, committing life insurance fraud, and attempting to seize inheritance funds. Attorney Daniel Rourke was also under investigation for complicity, and Detective Raymond Cole had been summoned to testify, ordered to surrender all contracts and emails. 2 days later, the police knocked on my door. Not to investigate me, but to collect further testimony. I handed over all the copies I had prepared. Emails, contracts, withdrawal records from our joint account. The officer looked at me, his eyes a mix of respect and quiet sorrow. Mrs. Caldwell, you didn't just save yourself. You saved Elaine's foundation. Otherwise, that money would have ended up in the hands of an opportunist. I nodded and replied simply, I just didn't want anyone else to be used. Meanwhile, Stephen was forced to face a reality he could no longer deny. Despite her frailty, Elaine appeared at the first deposition, seated in a wheelchair, her voice weak but unwavering. He's not here for me. He's here for the money. Before those words, Stephen only bowed his head and stayed silent. The local paper published a photo of him walking into the police building, hollow-eyed, his shirt wrinkled. The man who once flaunted a Rolex now looked like someone completely unmoored. Days later, Linda informed me Stephen had been formally charged with insurance fraud and financial abuse of marital property. Attorney Rourke's license had been suspended, and Raymond Cole had become a key witness, detailing every step of the investigation Stephen had paid him to conduct. I listened, feeling a mix of bitterness and relief. This was no longer just my story. This was a public case, where justice was finally visible. That evening, when I returned home, I found an envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a short handwritten letter from Elaine. Her handwriting trembled, but was still legible. Grace, thank you. You saved me from spending my final days in lies. If there's one last right thing I could do, it was exposing him and protecting you. Wishing you and the baby light I finished reading, tears falling. Not tears of despair, but of release, as if I had just watched one old door shut while another began to open. On an early May morning, the Denton County Court held the preliminary hearing for Stephen Caldwell's case on insurance fraud and misuse of marital assets. I wore a light blue maternity dress, simple but neat, and sat in the back row beside Attorney Linda. The courtroom wasn't crowded, but every gaze was fixed on Stephen. He appeared in a worn-out suit, tie loose, looking gaunt. The Rolex was gone. The confidence, gone. Just a man collapsed beneath the weight of truth. The prosecutor read the charges. $800,000 in life insurance fraud, unauthorized use of marital assets to hire a private investigator and cover legal fees, and conspiracy to seize inheritance from a charitable foundation. The evidence, emails, contracts, money transfers, had all been submitted through the file I compiled. Stephen's lawyer tried to argue that he had acted in confusion, thinking he was helping his ex-wife in her final days. But soft chuckles from a few attendees broke the illusion of that excuse. When it came time for testimony, Detective Raymond Cole stood, voice calm but resolute. He described how Stephen had hired him to investigate Elaine, to confirm her medical condition in isolation. He stated bluntly, he didn't ask how to help a sick woman. He asked how to quickly become the only person she relied on. The courtroom fell silent, broken only by the court clerk's pen scratching notes. When it was my turn, Linda gently placed her hand on my shoulder, signaling I didn't need to say much. I stood, looked directly at the judge, and said, I'm not here for revenge. I just want the truth acknowledged and my marital property protected. I'm carrying a child, and I want him to grow up in a world where justice means something. I sat down. I saw the eyes of a few older women glisten, as if they knew my words were for all of them, not just for me. In the end, the judge ruled. Stephen Caldwell was officially indicted, granted bail, but placed under strict supervision while awaiting a full trial. The court also ordered a temporary freeze on his accounts and affirmed that my personal assets, including the house, were acquired prior to marriage and not subject to division. When the gavel struck, I inhaled deeply. My home, my savings, and the safety of the child inside me, they were all now protected. As I stepped outside the courtroom, the midday sun hit the courthouse steps directly. Stephen sat slumped on a stone bench in the hallway, face in his hands, no longer looking for me. I didn't stop. I kept walking, one hand on my belly, my steps steadier than they had been in months. For the first time, I wasn't walking out of someone else's shadow, I was walking into my own light. Just 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, my phone rang on a chilly morning. It was Linda, her voice low and somber. Grace, Elaine passed away last night, peacefully, no pain. Before she died, she officially named you as the trustee of the Prescott Foundation. I stood frozen. Part of my heart ached, but another part brimmed with gratitude. Elaine was gone, but she left behind a living legacy, and passed it to me as a final trust. News of Stephen spread quickly. The full trial wrapped up within weeks, as the prosecution presented conclusive evidence of insurance fraud, attempted inheritance theft, and marital asset abuse. The judge struck the gavel, voice echoing across the chamber. Stephen Caldwell is sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and ordered to pay civil restitution to his lawful wife. He collapsed into his seat, pale, stripped of the persona of a man who once wore Rolexes and boasted success. The man who strode into someone else's home in a shiny Mercedes was now just another convict, head bowed in a prison uniform. I no longer followed the details closely, but when Stephen Caldwell's name flashed across the evening news, I felt only one truth. It was over. That afternoon, I received a sealed envelope from Elaine's attorney. Inside was a handwritten letter, shaky, slanted, but resolute. Grace, thank you for not turning away from the truth. You saved me from dying tethered to deceit. I believe you will use the Prescott Foundation to bring light to other women, to show them they are not alone. Never forget, kindness and integrity are the strongest legacies I finished reading, and tears fell onto the letter. But this time, they weren't of despair. They were of continuation. Elaine was gone, but she had passed her torch to me. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered to the baby in my belly, My son, I will keep this fire alive. And one day, I'll pass it on to you, not with words, but by living truthfully. 6 weeks later, my old home shone with a new spirit. The gray walls that once held heavy air had been repainted a soft cream. The living room now adorned with baby's breath flowers and watercolor prints I had hung with my own hands. On the wooden table in the center was a small cake with the simple words, James, 1 month old. It was my son's very first month celebration. Emily brought steaming chicken soup. Aunt Martha laid out warm pastries, and old friends gathered around the round table, voices full of laughter. I held James in my arms, watching him sleep peacefully amidst the warm chatter. The house that had once carried so much darkness now held only light and peace. No more Stephen's heavy footsteps, no more false promises, just love, freedom, and a real beginning. As everyone raised their glasses in celebration, I spoke slowly. We don't need much to call it happiness. Just to live truthfully and to be surrounded by those who never abuse our trust. Their eyes met mine, full of shared understanding, as if they knew I had closed one chapter and begun another. That night, after everyone had left, I placed James into the wooden crib in the living room, where moonlight streamed through a new curtain. I sat in the rocking chair, opened Elaine's letter once more. Its trembling lines no longer made me cry. They made me smile. She had passed me her torch, and now I was lighting it anew, in the very house that once witnessed lies, but now stood as a sanctuary for truth and integrity. Outside, the night wind rustled the lavender I had replanted in the garden. I whispered softly, a promise for both my son and Elaine. We stayed. We made this place a real home, and no one will ever take that away again. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment to share your experience. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that we, women who've weathered many storms, can build a community where truth and integrity always shine.